I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome to Arcane Mark. Secrets at the Table. GM Tools. So on today's episode, we are going to talk about how to run secrets that are at the table in general. We're not doing like adjudicating secret checks because we had like a whole episode specifically on adjudicating secret checks. This is when you're keeping secrets from some of the players, maybe all of the players, but not all of their characters. Maybe
the players know, but not the characters.
Maybe the players know, but the characters don't know. And like, how do you deal with those kind of secrets? So it's secrets that are at some level known to some people, either players or characters, but not others. And so I want to go through the different combinations of who could know and talk about how to run those in different ways. But if you in chat are watching and you have any questions about secrets at your own table that are not adjudicating secret checks, which we have another episode for, send them in the chat and we'll answer those too.
I see a question. Hello, everybody in chat. I see a question in chat. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing well. I'm doing great, Gifted Gabby. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing pretty well.
How are you doing?
So that is a good question. Let's go into secrets at the table and talk about some of the ways that secrets can be kept.
So one of the examples that I think of for secrets of the table is there's an iconic encounter in one of the Secret Arc adventures for Pathfinder Society in First Edition, where everyone's identities are anonymized from each other, and everyone in the room is just kind of like this cloaked figure, and nobody knows who is who.
And it's clear that not only are the PCs there, but also they're more than figures than PCs, and some of them are not friendly. But you don't know who are your party members and who are the enemies.
Yeah.
And it can lead to some interesting hijinks because, like, for example, one of the PCs, when one of the times we ran it, ran off and accidentally triggered multiple traps that hit the other party members.
So
then people are like, "Oh, that's one of the bad guys.
We should attack them." Yeah. So I figured we could talk about some of the strategies that we used in that encounter. One of the ones that we did for communication purposes is that we had people write down what their characters would say, and then the GM read off all of the things that were being said in a monotone voice, so that nobody could recognize, like, oh, this person said this. It was just, oh man, the sound is echoing around the room and these things are being
specifically said. All voices were changed into a monotone. And you couldn't tell where they were coming from. So it was just like, I am your friend.
Yes. Oops, I set off the trap by accident.
Yes, oops, I set off the trap by accident. This was not, I did not mean to hit you with that.
Unless you are my enemy, and then I did. Yeah, and for that, we also had some other techniques that we used for the movement, so people didn't know who was who. I'm trying to remember exactly what we did. Did we like have people pass to the GM what they wanted? I think we had to have people pass to the GM what they wanted their characters to do. Yes. And then the GM just executed all the things, and it's like, this figure does this or whatever, and then people might start to figure out, like, oh, okay, well, that figure is shooting arrows, so it's probably our archer, but they're not, like, necessarily entirely sure what was going on.
That's right. And that is one example that comes to your mind, but the iconic example, like, across RPGs is the one that Elf Tarot discussed, where somebody gets replaced by, like, a doppelganger or something.
Yeah.
And so that could be an interesting one, because that can fall, the iconic you're replaced by a doppelganger can fall into two different categories of the secrets that we were talking about.
Yes.
So, version 1. In this version, you tell the player that they've been replaced by a doppelganger. That player knows they've been replaced by the doppelganger. Obviously, their character knows they've been replaced by a doppelganger, but nobody else knows.
Yes.
That player is now your confederate, and they're playing the doppelganger and going around doing doppelganger stuff. I suppose there's a chance that like you told the player, but like the character doesn't know because the doppelganger used mind magic on themselves to think they're not a doppelganger, but that's
But
probably
probably,
unlikely.
yeah. So this works well. This can work well, like if you're gonna have a longer term thing going on with the doppelganger, or like you're worried about, like, or you think that the player would do a good job with the role playing of that doppelganger and their objectives while still playing out that character, or you think that like they would not like to be surprised by that fact later on.
Hmm. So, there's also another version of this where the player does not know
Hmm.
that their character was replaced. This is kind of a lot more difficult to pull off and can also make players be like, what?
Hmm.
Later on in ways that could be confusing.
Yeah, because the player not knowing, they may have the doppelganger that they doesn't know as a doppelganger do things that wouldn't make sense for that doppelganger to have done.
Yes, there are some very specific use cases for this.
Hmm.
I've done it before. In one case, there was a character who basically the entire like overall arc questing arc of what the character did was just pushing things toward the agenda of one particular NPC. But then they were just like really bad mouthing the NPC at random, even though they then continued to push that NPC's agenda
Hmm.
and were very like very predictable in the way that they acted and reacted to certain situations. So eventually, like an ally of that NPC who got mad, imprisoned the character and replaced the NPC had to replace that character because that character was essentially goading and corralling the rest of the party into
Hmm.
doing the NPC's agenda in the first place. So when I was running this, I basically the NPC who was replacing the character staged a situation where the character got like did a heroic action and got like permanently drained in some of their abilities, but then gained a special magic item that gave them a bunch of other abilities, which when you calculated everything that
Hmm.
happened, it just replaced their stats with a completely different stats that were the other character's stats.
Hmm.
My player did not realize that's what this was happening, but instead was like,
Hmm.
"Whoa, these stats are so cool! I have all these abilities
Wasn't there
now."
a thing that happened later where like there was another character who they were
Yes,
also
they had
playing?
to be replaced by two characters because
Hmm.
if that NPC needed to show up, then they had a second character replace them. So what I did was that it was like the one magic sword gives you these powers, but you can also use these two magic short swords
Hmm.
that switch your power set entirely. Now you have sneak attack and your skills change completely to these
So
skills.
the player's like, "Wow, this
The
is
skills are
awesome! I
like,
have
whoa,
all
this is
these."
very versatile. I could just do the ritual that takes a while, where I go off into the woods and meditate on these swords and then change into this different power set. I'm really much more versatile than I was before. I never had sneak attack damage. This is a lot of sneak attack damage. This is like as
Hmm.
much as a full rogue would have. And
Funny that.
yeah. And that way that both of the NPCs could appear at certain times, just not together and also with that character because they were like trading off and replacing the character.
Yes.
Like the one thing that may not have been like totally authentic to the NPCs is like maybe one of the NPCs would have wanted to not be playing that character and the player got to decide actually which NPC was playing them
Yeah.
at certain times. Although there were a few times where it was like this sword because of the stage of the moon is like losing some of its power, so you may have to use the other ones, or you won't have all the power ups. So, okay, that's fine. So it's very difficult to do that, but I have pulled it off once before, and just like that character got replaced by people who very much knew how he acted and wanted to continue convincing people that it was this character, but do all exactly the same things that that character would have done in
Hmm.
terms of like campaign role. Usually you won't be able to do that though. So I really recommend telling the player in like 90% or more of
And
cases.
Elf talks about enjoying that, playing a monster, trying to take their place, inserting some hints in the role play without being too bad. Yeah, I got to do that once with a shape changing monster who replaced one of my characters and was trying to mess up things within the party. And It took them a while to catch on. She was definitely like in the middle of causing some serious hijinks by the time they noticed what was going on.
That's true, but they did figure it out.
They eventually figured it out, and they stopped her from killing one of the other characters.
That's true.
They stopped her from killing one of the NPC allies of the
Yes.
party. Yeah.
Yes, they did stop her from killing the NPC ally. So it can definitely be fun, and it's fun for for a lot of players to
Mhm.
do that. But you have to know your players, and some players won't enjoy it. 'Cause some people are just like, I'm not playing my character, then I don't like it, and
Yeah.
others are just like, I don't want to betray the party. I don't want to be successful in this
Yeah.
because it won't be fun.
But I think like part of the reason why that was fun is because I knew like things were set up so that things were set up so that my the doppelganger that I was playing was going to be expected to be caught by the PCs and defeated and have like no, and it's kind of in some ways it's like being a co-GM briefly where you go in and you play the bad guy and you want them to be compelling in the way they're portrayed, but ultimately the player confederate is going to want them to lose and to get back to playing their original character.
Also, some people just like drama,
Hmm.
and they prefer that more than groups where everyone gets along and just like goes toward things, so they find it more interesting and plot twisty, and that's the perfect person to have play your doppelganger. Like, we had one player who was like that, who was also always like changing his characters, either
Hmm.
either repeated the same character over and over again or changed characters constantly, just depending on the way
Yeah.
that he wanted to do things, but also just liked it when there was drama and like differences of opinion and different motivations going on in the party, rather than the party just being like, we all have this goal, we're gonna work together,
Hmm.
we'll brainstorm together the best solution and then just do it. So find the right player if you're gonna do that classic replace them with a doppelganger. And it can be hilarious if you actually pull off the player doesn't know, but your player also has to be like pretty gullible in addition to everything else. Unless the NPC can somehow pull off their actual abilities, which this NPC was just not even close. Like, I replaced someone who had like 18 strength with someone who had 8 strength, for
Yeah.
example. It's like, yeah, your strength got drained, or it was this someone who had 18 to someone who had 8 and someone who had
Mhm.
12. It's like your strength got
Hmm.
stat drained by 10.
Yeah.
But don't worry, because when you use the other set of swords, you get +4
Yeah.
strength.
Another thing that made that work, which wouldn't necessarily work in a lot of campaigns, is that we were playing in a setting where magic was like rare and elusive, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's magic. So you couldn't just like go to the magic mart on the corner and get the spell that would restore if you had stat drain.
That's correct. It was permanent,
And
unrestorable
it wasn't
stat
like the
drain.
characters would generally have like an exhaustive knowledge of how magic worked, because yeah, and it was like an Arthurian type story, and we were generally knights and other round table ish individuals.
That's true. Also, the NPCs weaved in all of the like unfounded conspiracy theories that that character had into the narrative of the replacement. Like, there was like a mysterious figure who the character was just convinced was like his father. It's like, this person is my father,
Hmm.
in just wearing armor, and that's who it was. It was not.
Hmm.
It was actually the NPCs who replaced the character. But so then they decided to like use that same suit of armor, but make it appear to be like the main they replace character's father, and then the
Hmm.
father like comes in to save them from this thing that's stat draining everybody, and then dies. Is like, I'll pass the mantle on to you, my son. And so the player was like, yes, I knew that was my father. I knew it. I knew it the whole time.
So playing to preconceptions definitely
Yes.
helped there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, I have the mantle from my father. It's like, it was not your father.
Hmm.
But that's okay.
Yup.
That's okay. So that's sort of the like somebody gets replaced,
Hmm.
which is very classic in the one player knows, the rest of the party doesn't.
Hmm.
So let's talk about a situation where all of the players know but their characters don't, or
Yes.
one player knows but not because you want them to, or some subset know but not because you want them to, but just because they just know.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they just read spoilers online for this
Mhm.
adventure path.
Or maybe they have GM'd that adventure before because they're doing
Yes.
like organized play, and so they already know the story
I,
from
I'm
that.
I'm not saying they nefariously read
Yeah,
spoilers. It was just like maybe they were on Reddit
and they
and
saw
they
spoilers
were
and everything.
like
Yeah.
people were talking about difficult encounters in
Hmm.
APs. It's like, you know what? Encounter was very difficult when this plot twist villain who turned out to actually be evil and attacked us in part 6 of this adventure path. And they're like, whoa, did not want to know
Let's
that.
actually separate that out a little bit too, because I think that there's some real differences when it's just like one player who knows certain things versus the whole table. Because if there's one player, then generally it's a good idea for that player to take steps to make sure that their knowledge isn't going to unduly influence
What if
the
it's
story in a
everyone
particular way.
except one?
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
another interesting one. So here's an example.
Hmm.
Let's say that I've seen this show up
Hmm.
online, even though our group does not do this. Usually, when in a situation where a group is going through, let's say, a an adventure path,
Hmm.
and at about like book 3, like the GM flakes, they manage to restart it. One of the players who was played before
Hmm.
becomes the GM. They get one new player, but the new
Hmm.
player insists that they start from the beginning
Yeah.
and not where they were before, because they're like, well, no, I want to start from the beginning. Everyone's like, we really like this adventure path, so I
Yeah.
guess we'll play it from the beginning again. So literally everybody knows it except the
Hmm.
one new player because they already even played it with the same
Yeah, you
group.
really have to balance there then too, because some of the things when you if it's just one player who has played the thing before, then you might be able to get away with like having that character play a character who having that player play a character who might be a little bit less of the decider, so that they wouldn't be the ones who are like making crucial linchpin decisions and then having to worry about whether their information is locking things in. But the more players have advance notice, the more that just makes puts a lot of pressure on the people who haven't played it before to make all this decision. It makes them feel like the group as a whole is less engaged. So,
Yes.
I think it's easier to handle those situations where you can just say, yeah, I'm going to play someone who has like low charisma and kind of goes with the flow, or has their interest and they're going to focus on things that promote that interest as opposed to
What if
like
you
other
are
things.
the only player but you can't?
Yeah, because like
Let's say you
you're the
can't
face of the
because
character, or
yeah,
it's
yeah,
about your.
you're obviously a decision character, but like if it's org play, let's
Mhm.
say that they needed you. You already didn't want to play the one that you already knew for that
Mhm.
reason, but they needed you to play. You only have one character that you could play, and they're
Yeah.
obviously the character that is gonna be making the decisions here because I don't know. This is like in Mendev talking to Mendevian Crusaders, and you're a
Mhm.
Mendevian Crusader character, or you're a Hell Knight, and you're dealing with Hell Knights, and you're from that order, and
Yeah.
everyone else in the party is chaotic,
Yeah.
and it's like obviously you're going to be the one talking to the Hell Knights because the adventure says you get a -8 penalty if you're chaotic, and you
Yeah.
get a plus
So I would
4
say,
bonus if you're Hell
if
Knights or
it's
something like that.
I would say that still, if there are opportunities for your character to consult other characters in the conversation, of deciding what to do, that's still good if they can. um if you know things that are more like surprising or esoteric, or like you happen to know from later in the adventure that this person is secretly X, Y, and Z, like err on the side of having your character not notice those weird things, unless like you happen to notice them in your first playthrough, and so you already knew that you had noticed them.
Yeah,
um
my typical way is do what I would have done on the first playthrough and be very clear to everyone else that that's what
mhm,
I'm going to do. So,
yeah.
and if I GM'd it, I can simulate myself.
Mhm.
So I will just be like, I know this character.
Mhm.
I've played them a lot. I know what this character would do. I'm going to tell you right now, some of them will not necessarily be the best things to happen
Mhm.
in the adventure.
Yeah.
So don't assume that I'm going to use but my knowledge
Mhm.
to get make us win, I'm going to use it to do what my character would do. Typically, like that's generally in the right direction. I think
Mhm.
I'm a pretty collaborative player, but if you don't engage and try to also shape the decisions, and you just take the decisions that my characters make, they could be the wrong ones that might end up losing us out on things. So
Yeah.
please engage with this. I'm not using any of my knowledge. Like I'll tell
Mhm.
people that. And sometimes the decisions my characters would make would be fine. Like maybe
Mhm.
not the most ideal ones. Maybe yes, the ideal ones, but at least ones that are like generally okay.
One of the tactics that I use sometimes if I'm like, oh gosh, I can't figure out would my character have done this or is my external knowledge influencing me, is I might put something to I might something put something to a die roll. I might, ask the GM for I might think to ask the GM for, some recall knowledge checks about certain things to have the GM help me figure out what my character might know in this situation. Or, I might go back to like some older edition style, like, oh, roll my in older editions I might have been like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna roll like an int check for my character or wisdom check. You can still do that kind of thing with I can still do that kind of thing with like a flat check or something and say, all right, you know what, I'm not sure if my character would have done this or this thing or that thing. I know that this thing's the better thing, but I like honestly don't know.
I'll roll
I
a
can
religion
roll,
check to see
yeah,
what
roll
ritual I
religion
decide
check
to
to see
do.
what I decide to do. Or yeah, find some kind of a way to let the dice decide when you're stuck. So that way you're not left being like, oh wait, I don't know if that was the right decision.
Yeah, I think that that tends to be good. Try to avoid it,
Hmm.
like Linda said at first, if you can, but sometimes you can't. If your whole group knows it except for one person, that's just rough.
Yeah.
Because having someone, the one thing that I think that so obviously, I think everyone knows that going in and then just metagaming all of the knowledge is
Hmm.
bad. But the thing that you're more vulnerable to doing because you think it might be a good thing, and even like some experienced players or even like industry professionals do this, and I think can wind up causing issues in the way Linda said with the
Hmm.
table where the one person feels adrift or like put on the spot is just being passively not doing anything,
Hmm.
like never making a decision, even if their character obviously should. Always doing
Hmm.
something that is like sort of a random side thing instead of the main plot, like veering things off
Hmm.
because they don't want to solve the main plots, and just hoping that someone else will do
Yeah,
it.
I would say that especially when you have that larger group, you're not gonna, like I was saying before, you're not gonna want them all being like, oh yeah, low charisma, not necessarily influencing things, but having those characters have strong personalities and motivations they bring to what they're doing. So then you can say, oh yeah, so you're not then saying, "Oh yeah, no, my character is going to investigate this NPC because I know out of character that's the right thing to do." It's going to be, my character is going to investigate this NPC because they have the this and that background, which means that they're suspicious of this organization and they're always looking for signs of their involvement. And having them, like Mark was implying there, not just into the right things, but also look into things that are not necessarily going to move the plot forward, or even better, are going to cause the story to take a slightly different shape than it did when you looked at it before. Because if you played something before and the group decided that they wanted to charge head on into a particular dungeon, and then your next group decides that they want to infiltrate it, then that's going to give a different experience. That's going to evolve in a different way too.
Yeah, absolutely. But the reason why it's a pitfall to just always be wrong, to
Hmm.
always not make a decision, and always sort of be hands off is it can potentially mislead a group, and I've seen it
Hmm.
do that before. Also, hi Nitrace, thanks for the sub. Basically, people just have different play styles, and
Hmm.
especially if they know that the person is someone who is like feels like they're an authority figure and they're just weirdly doing these side things or not
Hmm.
doing anything, it can wind up making some of the other players who might have been more of like in terms of follow the leader just like get distressed or potentially
Hmm.
distracted.
I've
Um,
even seen a scenario get a bad review because the author was at the table and tried to be hands off, and then the person was annoyed that they
I
just
saw
thought
that
that
too.
that character was checked out.
Yep, they thought the character was checked out, and that that things dragged because that character didn't
Hmm.
contribute to decisions, which is like, yeah, it's a weird situation. It's not one that you would expect
Hmm.
to see. So I would suggest trying to avoid having that
But
issue if you
what
can.
you do want to look at is I would say is like discovery and spotlighting to make sure, like, your character as someone who's played it before should still be having some of the spotlight and making some of the discoveries overall and things like that. But when it gets into an issue would be, are they like disproportionately the one who's discovering things, uncovering things, figuring out things about the plot, having spotlight, then you're running into an issue. But if they're like the one who never does anything, then that's also a problem, and that's probably not going to be fun for you as the player either.
Another way you can try to do that is like, let's say you have something with time ticks, and there's three things that you think your character would investigate, and one of them is really cool
Hmm.
and important for the plot, and the group agrees. You're like, well, let's investigate these three things. They're like, yeah, we agree. How should we split it up?
Hmm.
You could intentionally suggest to send somebody else to the one that was the more important one, and you
Yeah.
go after one that was a red herring. Even though maybe you're one of the people who suggested the three things that included the important one because you knew that's what you would have suggested before.
Hmm.
If you're not good at separating and knowing what you would do before, then I think avoid even more. Like, because we give these tips, but it's like, well, what if I can't?
Hmm.
You need to avoid even more playing something where you know.
Hmm.
Some people aren't as good at it, and so just don't. And
Hmm.
even if it doesn't make the table, it might be worth it not to play over possibly making the table, but then causing it to drag or run into issues because you obviously don't want to just metagame and bowl
Hmm.
through. But if you aren't good at like sort of acting natural,
Yeah.
it can cause other issues
For
if
a
you don't.
second playthrough, definitely picking a character that's very different from the one that you played through the first time can help. But if you were the one who GM'd it last time, then it's like, well, I happen to know these things. Another thing you can do if your character, if you're having trouble with sort of that separation, is play a character who's very good at noticing certain things. So like if you're like, oh well, I know all these facts about these kinds of things already, then playing a character that is like an investigator type character, or like a lore oracle type character who would know a lot of things, then the GM would have an excuse to give you a lot of information in the game that you could then be like, okay, now that my character knows this, I can act upon it.
Yep. Also, if the GM needs some help, because this is true whether you know stuff or not, and in fact, probably more
Hmm.
likely to happen if you don't know the adventure. Just like give the GM some mercy. Like for example, I was playing a module back in the Boston launch. I did not read it. I had
Hmm.
no idea about the module. Obviously, its name included the word murder, so we
Hmm.
knew there would probably be a murder. But also, like we were brought in, and we didn't. They didn't tell us there was going to be a murder right at the
Hmm.
beginning in the adventure, but like they did say mysterious stuff was going
Hmm.
on, and just like there were like thefts and disappearances, and my character was an investigator.
Hmm.
So the adventure assumes that like you go talk to someone, and then that you just like go to sleep and a
Hmm.
murder happens during that time. But my character, who had dark vision and his MO has always been, and I didn't know this
Hmm.
adventure exactly what was going to happen, it's always been that like he stays up all night and then sleeps in the morning. Specifically, was like, okay, I'm going to stay up all night and I'm going to place X. And the GM is like, well, that's going to be a problem for the adventure if you go to place X because of the fact that,
Hmm.
like you would see things that
Hmm.
you shouldn't see. I was like, all right, well, let's say that I tried to do that, but my character was too tired from traveling here and I fell asleep on the job, and he's going to be like kicking himself
Hmm.
uh, for the rest of the adventure for failing to do that, and also telling people that they should suspect him due to the fact that he should have been able to notice it.
Hmm.
And the GM was like, okay. And so then that happened. Because that would be better than the whole adventure not happening because my character should have seen it.
Hmm.
So that is sort of some tips you can do if like you're the one who knows it. If everybody knows it, then you're really gonna drag
Hmm.
if you just try to let the one person decide unless they are like the most
Hmm.
driven
Also,
deciding
it
player
feels
of
kind
all
of like
time.
it can start feeling like you're playing by yourself or playing with a smaller group of players, and you lose
Yes.
a lot of the interaction that way. Should we talk a bit about what happens if like literally everybody knows out of character, but the characters don't know?
Sure. So something that literally everyone knows out of character, but the characters don't know. Like, I don't know, dealing with a monster that like everybody's read in the bestiary that it has this ability, but it's like
Hmm.
also super rare and obscure, and none of the characters know that it has that
Or
ability, for
like the
example.
characters are in a situation where like their characters are like confused, or maybe like the characters got pulled into some kind of weird like demi plane or time warp thing, and the players know what's going on out of character, but the characters don't know what's going on.
Or to give
Or
another good example, in the Eberron campaign setting, probably one of the only things Linda knows about
hmm
that book is that on a page it's like facing important player rules, there's a
hmm
sidebar that's just like super secret. The leader of the kingdom of Karnath is secretly a vampire and nobody knows.
hmm
And it's just like in the player facing book, it's right
yeah,
next to like an ancestry or something. It's like really,
yeah,
it's in the middle of where nobody should see it.
yeah.
And
It's
it's
like
right there. So like any player who actually read the Eberron
mhm.
campaign setting and paid any attention knows that that guy is a vampire,
Or
but you're not supposed to know.
like Razmir's deal in Galarian.
Yes, at least that's in like a lore focused book, but
Yeah.
still people kind of know that he's a fake. And
hmm
in world people some people suspect he's a fake,
hmm
but nobody can prove it.
Yeah.
And so that those are good examples of where like everybody knows out of character. And with the vampire guy, like nobody in character knows or even suspects except
hmm
for like one evil undead cult. With Razmir, you could be like some of the players are suspicious and others
Yeah.
are like, well, no, maybe he is a god. We shouldn't. We
Because suspicion does exist in the world.
and
Yeah.
people all know he's sketchy as heck. So
hmm
they'd be like, well, he's sketchy as heck whether or not he's a god, but he's
Yeah.
obviously powerful either way. So it doesn't matter. Is what
hmm
some players might say. As others, I'm sure he's not a god. But with the guy being a vampire, that is actually potentially more disruptive
hmm
because like there's a lot that you can say about him being a vampire and things that would change based on that, but nobody has even an inkling that he is. In
hmm
fact, he's a lawful evil vampire who is like out of the five nations, one of the main people who's trying to keep the peace and just generally prevent an all-out like total war. And the neutral good queen is
hmm
pushing a total war. And so like you might think, hey, this guy's actually a pretty good guy, but he's actually a vampire.
Yeah. Another good way to look at it too when you're thinking about, because I see a chat here about dealing with metagame can be tough on some tables, that their healthy balance that starts with not using what you do to ruin the mystique for players without that knowledge. Yeah, exactly. So I think if you start with like if your character is going to do something, knowing why your character does what they do. So like, your character shouldn't go like buy garlic and steaks when visiting someone who they secretly know is a vampire because they are a vampire. And it's like, okay, how do you know they're a vampire? Because I read the adventure. It's like, no. But like, what reason would you have to suspect they were a vampire? Oh, we noticed that all of the mirrors in their house were covered, and that and that they had a sign that said no garlic, and like this thing and that thing, and this NPC said that. Like, if you can justify what their character is doing based on signs and clues and things that have been actually appeared in the game and information that they've received, then that's an easier way to go about it too. If you don't have like the simulation of what your character would,
Unless
like what you would
unless
know,
your character is my PC
hmm
Alkaini from Shackled City, because then she might just like for no like I
hmm
hadn't read the adventure, but just like for no adequately
hmm
explored reason, just latch on and decide that there was a vampire,
hmm
make the town pay for us to get anti-vampire equipment, and then there was actually a vampire, even though I didn't think there was.
yep.
I wanted her like outlandish theories to be a little bit rebuked from
hmm
that, or I thought that would be an interesting plot line because like she is in some ways a genius, in a lot of ways a genius, but
hmm
also is a little bit too carried away.
Yeah.
And as I've mentioned in previous streams,
You kept trying to come up with wild conspiracy theories with no basis in fact that wound up being correct.
yes, that's correct. Pretty much. And there was like almost basically no evidence that there
hmm
was a vampire there, so I thought I would be okay with that one. It was literally all we knew was that some goblins had destroyed the green, and they burned down a granary and they left graffiti that was like Drakthar lives.
hmm
So Alkaini is like, well, okay, so it says Drakthar lives. That sounds like either a dragon or a vampire
hmm
name, Drakthar. And then lives, but sounds more like a vampire because, like, you might think he was dead, but he's actually alive because he's a vampire. And so, therefore, he's a vampire. We need anti-vampire gear. There was no any. That was literally the only reason. And then Drakthar was a vampire, and so we had the correct gear.
Yeah, well, you know what? Felgrim Sneak was not a were-rat.
That's true, but there was a guy whose name was almost exactly the same in a different adventure who
Yes,
was a were-rat.
that's true.
So it was just being, that wasn't Alkaini. Alkaini was the one who was always right. I'm not the one who was always right.
Yes.
So it's rough. If I was playing Alkaini, I don't know what I would do though, because like it was just mimetic with me trying to have her be wrong, and then she was accidentally right. Even when they had to rewrite the deities in 4th edition D&D, so Alkaini would retroactively be right about her main thing. Her main heresy about her deity was chosen to be a true heresy in 4th edition D&D. Copernicus thought it was funny.
That's good. I like the details of Alkaini.
Right. The one thing she was wrong about was that she always identified as just a very short human, even though she was a halfling, and she was definitely a halfling. But you know, like she was raised among humans and was just like, no, I'm a human. I'm not a halfling. Halflings are not someone that I like to associate with.
So that was a little bit of a tangent, I think, from what we were talking about before, which is when if everybody knows something, but the characters don't.
Yes.
I think, you know, one of the ways to have fun with this is you know, making sure that there's not like a sense where the players might feel pressured to apply that out of character knowledge that they have to help their characters. So like it's not like, oh my gosh, you know, we could save our characters from some terrible fate, but only if we apply metagame knowledge. It's more being able to enjoy the dramatic irony of characters making misinformed decisions and being like, oh my gosh, they're doing that because they don't know. So generally in those kinds of situations, having the stakes be a little bit lower for what kinds of things might go wrong is helpful. Or just, you know, having players who enjoy having their characters mess up in pretty particular ways and just be like, oh my gosh. Like in the Changeling game that Mark is running for me, I have several different characters and each of them has a different set of knowledge, and based on things that I know from one character's knowledge base, sometimes other characters like make giant mistakes and it's just like, oh my gosh, this character just has no idea what's going on.
Well, that's what it does. If you GM a lot or play in a game with multiple characters like that, it really builds your muscles to just avoid using the parts of your knowledge that you're not supposed to be using.
It's like, you know, this character A says something to an NPC that I know based on character B, knowing that NPC well is like going to be massively putting his foot in his mouth, or like, you know, that sort of thing. It's fun to play around with that.
Yep, absolutely. You want to have, and B, if you're one of the people who's trying to do this, a player who is interested in interesting situations coming up at the game table, as opposed to just like winning, pure winning, and just going through and succeeding on everything.
Whereas, like, you know, so in that case, if I know, like, oh my gosh, you know, character A is going to wind up with you know, egg on his face here and gonna need to do something to fix this situation, versus if it was like, oh, this is gonna get character A killed, then like that wouldn't be fun. Or like, oh, this is gonna be a funny conversation. You kind of take a step back. It depends, yeah, like you were saying, on how emotionally invested the player gets in the character being consistently like successful in a way that is just like, you know, smooth sailing and nobody ever complains about what they do, and
that's right,
that sort of thing.
So let's see, what about a situation where like all of the characters may know something but the players don't know it?
Okay, so in that case, so I guess there's multiple sides of this. There's the one where the solution is to give the players the knowledge by calling for recall knowledge checks, or just telling them, hey, your characters know this stuff. Like, you might have a situation where you have a handout that you give to the players that's like, okay, here's some basic background information. Like, this might happen, for example, you're starting a new game and you have some information that you want your players to know. This might be, for example, for a published adventure, like, here's the player's guide. This gives you a general background of things that your character would know. It can also sort of happen by speaking as the GM. If your player is about to do something that their character would know, like they what I think we've talked about sort of like the classic example of like walking off a cliff, where it's like the character. Let's say you're playing without a map or whatever, and your character says, I want to walk 10 feet to the south, and then you would say, well, your character can see that there's a cliff there, so then they would walk over the cliff's edge. Do you still want to do that?
I talked about the time that someone still did it, although he
Yes.
did bring rope, but he left it with
Hmm.
Tobias. Bad mistake.
So whether it's or like if the player says that their character would do something and that it seems that the player doesn't know something the
Are
character would
you
obviously know.
sure you want to do that?
Yeah.
That's not for secrets as so much as a like descriptive of the world, though. What about situations where, let's say, you know your
Hmm.
players, and your players even explained this that you
Hmm.
have one or more players who are just they are not good at dealing with metagaming stuff,
Hmm.
but they don't want it to ruin the fun for themselves and other people. But they know that if they know it, that they're gonna metagame it.
Hmm.
And so therefore, you've taught that out and you've decided to do things where there's some secrets that maybe their character knows, but you just don't tell the players so that they don't have to worry about metagaming.
Hmm. I would say that you'd want to look at cases where still look at cases where that secret would be very significant and important that their character knows that. You might choose to wait to reveal that information to them until a key moment.
Yes. So I think it should be significant but rarely come up. Should
Hmm.
be something that in most situations when they role played their character, it wouldn't have been adjusted by knowing that. But when it
Hmm.
does come up, it's crucial. And then that way, if you're ready for the reveal when it does come up, then you tell them at the time when their
Hmm.
decision would be changed based on knowing it or not. Um, where it would be important to know that, but they can't metagame it. Like so,
I could see like playing a game where like one character is secretly a mole and you're trying to figure out like who it is and nobody knows, and they're all like playing it out based on the information that they have. Like, oh yeah, who is the mole or whatever, and they have the information that they're pulling through, and then later on like you reveal who it is. But that way, like, maybe your players want to play like, kind of like a game of deception, but none of them has really great bluff in real life, and so they're worried that if they are the mole they're going to give it away, and so they're playing like a mystery game.
yep, exactly. Or enough of them don't
Hmm.
that they all agree together that they
Yeah.
won't know because
Because if it
otherwise
fell, they can say, oh, it's
it's
not.
not the one this person or
Yeah.
this person
Hmm.
because they don't have good bluff. It has to be one of the ones who has good bluff.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So there are ways to do it, and there are ways to make it work. Now, here's the more one that's a little more rare. Well, I
Hmm.
guess the one where the players don't know is also rare. But what about where the GM doesn't know and some of the players know? So this is a very tricky one. It's one
Hmm.
that sometimes adversarial players try to use in situations where it's not appropriate, even though there are appropriate
Hmm.
situations to use this.
So, like for example, like having. So I'm thinking about things like character powers, items, abilities, things like that that the GM doesn't know about.
So one of the issues with trying to do something that the GM doesn't know about, the adversarial version is like,
Hmm.
well, I think the GM metagames, so I'm just going. We're gonna set up for this encounter, and we're gonna like put some setup things,
Hmm.
and we're not gonna tell you what any of those
Hmm.
are, and then during the encounter, we'll tell you.
Hmm. So, but this does make me think of one example where it could work well. There's a scenario where you have the players taking the role of kobolds, and the kobolds are laying traps, and they're setting them in different places throughout their home,
Yes,
and so
that works
yeah.
well. That was, in fact, the example I was going to use
Hmm.
for a variant of that that could work
Yeah.
because it has a worksheet with
Hmm.
very specific things that you can do and where you can put them.
Hmm.
And you could just create your own score
Hmm.
sheet of it that is clearly a hard copy so the GM knows you're not just making it
Hmm.
up and having it happen anytime. And it works.
And you have like little tiles that, yeah, and then you're like, oh, you stepped in that square. It's sort of like a battleship type thing. It's like, and
Yes.
now we reveal, area A. This section here has
Linda
this
has moved
trap.
forward to the solution, which is create a framework by
Hmm.
which the players can have certain amounts of hidden knowledge that will work if you want to do that. I'm gonna continue with the bad version of it, which is just
Mhm.
like the players just decide whatever the heck they want. It's not like a set of traps that you pre-vetted and
Mhm.
then told them which spaces they can put them in. It's just they decided that they were doing this, and they
Mhm.
entirely invented what their setup was. The problem is the GM is the arbiter of the world. So, for example, if their trap involved, I don't know, like they're on this weird new alien planet and they dug up the sand to create a pit, and they didn't know that
Mhm.
if you dig up past like 2 inches, the sand is combustible and explodes.
Yeah.
Like
It could be
it's
something
like
that
you
it
couldn't.
wasn't consistent with the world, or
There's
like
certain things that that the GM has
Mhm.
to know what you're doing
Yeah.
because there might be information that you don't
Or
know.
let's say that they tried to get like they were like, oh yeah, we made this trap with a huge amount of explosives, but they didn't know that like explosives are highly regulated in this particular area. So getting that many explosives would have required them to get a
Exactly.
permit, or like some other facts about the world, or like there may be like something that involves like some kind of a spell that you decide, this spell for PCs and NPCs it just doesn't work for this game because it's like, oh, we teleported here and got that. It's like, well, actually, teleportation doesn't work here. I'm not going to give access to teleportation because otherwise, this part of the adventure later on breaks.
Yes. Whereas if you describe what if we're talking about setting a trap, you describe what kind of trap you want to set,
Hmm.
make sure that works with the GM, and then be like, well, we're going to put it on one of the squares of this map. We'll
Hmm.
mark it on a sheet,
Yeah.
but just not tell you.
Hmm.
Just so you don't have to worry about
Yeah.
metagaming of moving it or not. If the GM is cool with it, that works fine.
Hmm.
That's a way that it's a back and forth. You get it in a framework where you know it works. The GM's like, yes, I approve of this trap. It works
Yeah,
in the game.
and you're not gonna have to worry
And you
about
decide
something
where it
where it's
goes.
like, well, the problem is that you set those things up, but like the enemies had someone with trap spotter who was going around and doing this thing, and so now that thing back there didn't make sense.
Right. But like another example, it doesn't always have to be traps. Is like
Hmm.
the players secretly pre-buffing and writing
Yeah.
it down, but they don't even tell the GM that they did.
Yeah.
Like this is another example of an issue
Hmm.
because you don't know, like maybe the opponents have like an arcane sight and they can see up the spells.
Hmm.
Maybe they had an alarm that goes off whenever a necromancy spell was cast
Hmm.
because they are worried about people making zombies, and
But
so
you
when
can,
you
yeah.
cast false life it
Yeah.
actually would have set off
But if
that
there
alarm.
are like some of those more specific situations, you can if there but like in a lot of cases some of these things wouldn't necessarily be a problem. Like usually PCs just like writing down what their pre-buffs are and then moving on would be fine. But if there's like other weird situations
Well,
that are at play.
except for that they'll usually at least say, I'm
Yeah.
gonna do some
Yeah, I'm gonna
pre-buffs.
if they say that,
Right?
so they're
And then
doing
you
that.
might be like,
Yeah.
hold on, I want to see which ones they are.
Yeah.
But some people, it's pretty rare, but
Hmm.
I've seen online people discussing situations where the players just like kind of they wrote it on their sheet, so it wasn't just that they were fudging it, but
Hmm.
they just kind of didn't mention that they were casting a
Yeah.
spell at all, which means that like your loud, clear voice could have been overheard by someone. There's numerous reasons
Yeah.
why
It
the
could have
GM
caused
needs
other
to
things.
know
And
that
also
something's
like
happening, and then the GM's like, well, hold on. And like a while later, you cast all these pre buffs. It's like I wrote it down. It's like I believe that you wrote it down, but at
yeah.
the time when you cast it, something should have happened.
Yeah.
So
And part of it too is like, this is also assuming everyone's acting in good faith. Unfortunately, in the same way that you can have some folks who will like, roll a die and then notice it's high and then say, "Oh yeah, that was my roll for this thing." The same way that you need to declare before rolling, okay, this is what I'm rolling and then have a plan for your GM. Somebody could say, "Oh yeah, they wrote down the pre-buffs and then they decided as soon as that there was about to be an encounter, oh, they cast them right before that."
that is another example of someone, or just like
Hmm.
the GM's keeping track of the timer and they're not. So
Yeah.
if you don't alert the GM to when you cast it during the adventure, and the GM might not have been keeping track, right?
Hmm.
You wrote it down at some point. Then a while later, you're like, oh yeah, I cast this. It was like earlier. It was like, when did you
Hmm.
cast it? It's like when we were talking about the bears that we saw over
And
there.
it's like, well, I
It's
wasn't
like, well, I
tracking
wasn't
time at that
tracking
point.
time that specifically at that point, and you cast a 10-minute spell. I don't know if at this point how long it's been. I could
Hmm.
have tracked time for you all, but I think it's probably over.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, well, I would have gone faster if since the spell is up, it shouldn't be over. It's like, well, but you didn't
Tell me that
really
the
tell
spell
me. You
was up,
didn't
so
say that you were,
and then you guys
you
were
did
talking
this,
for
and you were
like
talking
20
about
minutes
the
with this
bear
person.
for 20 minutes in
Yeah.
real life, and then
Yeah.
um like Bob went out to scout, and that's
Mhm.
about like 1,000 feet away that was. So if you think
Yeah, and
about
that's
how
like,
long
well, in
that would
that
have
case, I
taken,
wouldn't have cast the spell. It's like, yeah, but
yeah,
you
but you
apply the
then
bonus
said that
on
you
this
did,
one,
and
and
then
then
you
yeah,
wrote it down. So
yeah.
there's a lot of reason that since the GM is the adjudicator and sort of like the arbiter of a lot of things, that you don't want to withhold information from the GM, but more so you can figure it out by being like, if you're in a group that wants to have some hidden information,
Mhm.
be like, I'm gonna cast some 10-minute buffs and write them down on my sheet.
Mhm.
If you need to know what they are for some reason, I can tell you, but otherwise it can be a surprise.
Mhm.
You can see if you want to do that. That can work out. It's the same as with the traps. Give the GM enough
Mhm.
information that they will know that they need to ask for the rest of the information. And if they just don't like that style and just like, please give me all the information all the time, then just give them all the information. If they
Mhm.
are like very bad with it and super metagame constantly, then ask them not to metagame. And if they
Mhm.
can't, like, think about maybe someone else should cycle into GMing or something like that. But you're not gonna have a good situation with being like, you cannot treat this information correctly, GM. Therefore, I'm going to withhold it from you.
Yeah,
It's not gonna
it
work out.
falls apart at
The
that point.
GM is the arbiter of everything that happens to the point that like you're not you're not gonna be in a good
Yeah,
situation.
if your GM is like trying to metagame to the point, if you're worried about your GM metagaming, then you've already lost.
Yeah, and if you're trying to like punish or prevent the GM from metagaming what they don't want you to, they will find a way to. If it's a
Mhm.
GM who's not a great GM and is seems to be overly punitive and metagaming, they'll find a way to do something
Mhm.
back to you such that you just don't want to get
Yeah,
into
like for
that kind
example,
of
I can see the
escalation.
sort of thing if like the players feel like, unfairly too many NPCs know about what the PCs are up to and happen to be too overly prepared, then that
It's
can.
like, why did the cult of fireballs stop casting fireball when the moment I had spell immunity fireball up?
Mhm.
But then when I got dispelled, multiple other groups that didn't know
They didn't
about
know
us,
they got
that
dispelled
didn't
too.
know it got dispelled or anything, counter started using it again
Yeah, exactly.
immediately.
Like that's a serious problem.
Yes.
But you also before
So
mentioned
those
something.
other ones were on their Lent of fireballs, where it's a cycle. Different encounter groups have to not do fireballs so that they can appreciate fireballs more when they actually have
Oh my god.
fireballs. And it just
Yeah.
so happened you came
Yeah,
across the
no,
ones that
it would be fair to have like one in the group cast fireball, and then they're like, oh my gosh, immune to fireball, and then they try other things. But every group then wastes like their first turn trying to fireball, and
or if
eventually
they
like
one of them gets
one of
away
them
and
gets
says like
away and says, guys,
they
they're
have
immune to
immunity,
fireball,
then
and then
even
it's
if it
like
gets
yeah,
dispelled, then they won't use it. Or
yeah,
maybe
but then
someone
yeah,
escapes and is like, "We dispelled their immunity to fireball. You can use fireball." But there should be
hmm
like a logical reason
yeah,
for it.
exactly. Well, there's an example that you brought up earlier that we didn't get into.
Okay.
Is like with if all the players are very familiar with like a type of monster, and then like everyone's saying like the characters in character have never seen a troll before, and nobody's got good recall knowledge, and everyone's like use fire or whatever. Or like the second that a skeleton appears in front of a group of first level adventurers, everyone's like, all right, everyone, take out your bludgeoning weapons or whatever.
I think that for the skeleton, at least, like it's not that unreasonable that like
Hmm.
trying to pierce a skeleton
Is not,
where
yeah,
it's like got holes to go
yeah.
through it is not like certain weapons that are supposed to catch on your flesh and other things like that. Like that one, I could vaguely see that you
Yeah.
don't even need a recall knowledge against undead, but even just like any structural
Hmm.
knowledge of like how things operate and like knowing your weapons.
Hmm.
But the troll is definitely just like, suppose that the entire group just fails a
Hmm.
very easy society check on trolls, or no one has society and just
Hmm.
like everyone fails or critically fails,
Yeah.
and they're just like, why is this thing coming back up? And every player knows it's a troll and we know what its weakness is.
Yeah. So I would say in that case, if somebody then starts saying like use fire, like or using that information, try to see if somebody can succeed at a recall knowledge check to know that
But
information
let's
or
suppose that nobody
nobody
does.
did.
You
Yeah.
got all failures, maybe not even a critical failure, so nobody
Hmm.
even has any idea. Then you would be like, you can be like, it's not dying. You don't know why, but your characters don't know that it has a regeneration that's stopped by fire or acid. What will you do?
Hmm.
Give me a few ideas of things that you're gonna do that are not only fire and acid, and
Hmm.
we'll play through them.
Yeah.
And you could talk about it like, well, we might try to like drown it first, or
Mhm.
like try some other things. It's like, well, we can
Oh, so maybe a cold iron weapon will work.
cut it into little pieces. Oh
And
no, it just grows back. Okay, well, burn the body. It's like,
mhm.
okay, well, you find out that it burns immediately and it stops regenerating
Yeah,
at
and
that
that's
point.
sort of like some things that don't work until into finding something that works strategy can be very
Because like
satisfying.
burning the body of something that keeps
Yeah.
coming back to life is a kind of reasonable thing to do. It
Mhm.
would be on most people's lists of possible options.
Yeah.
Now, if it was not defeated by fire, but was only defeated by like cold,
Yes.
that's a little bit rough because I don't think almost anyone would be like, well, let's cold the body of this thing.
Mhm.
Um, so that would be like very hard to determine.
So maybe in that case, the best thing for them to do is to,
Like
have them
bury it.
bury it, or like then they, or like retreat and go find someone who would know to give them
It's
the
just like
information.
keep stabbing it while someone digs a hole and then bury it alive.
Yeah, or some other thing like that.
Yeah, and then retreat until someone finds the information while it's
Yeah.
buried alive, and then dig it up and then use cold damage.
Yeah, and then
on it.
having a story where it's like, oops, no one had, we all failed, so we had to go, or like, oops, we realized no one had society, so we had to go get this research, and then next level, someone decided they wanted to be trained in society, so they would learn these things.
I mean, Kitchev, it keeps coming back and encase it in ice works if you can actually encase it in ice, but
Yeah.
there's not really much of a reason to like ray of frost
Frost
it.
something, yeah, legit.
Yeah. So altogether, you can see as we piece through every possible combination of who knows and who doesn't know. A lot of it is about like establishing a social contract with your group, figuring out what should be shared and when. Like the with the GM, that gave a great example of like there's some amount that should be shared. You
Hmm.
should get on the same page about that, and then there's some parts that can be secret enough to make the secret fun, and
Hmm.
you keep that secret. Or the example you gave where everybody knows that one person is a mole,
Hmm.
and none of the players even know if their character is the mole, but
Yeah,
everyone knows there is a mole.
yeah, and
And you can even
oftentimes,
say
yeah.
that like your characters don't know
Hmm.
that there's a mole.
Or
You, the
here's,
players,
yeah.
know that there is one.
Or here's another one. We had a character in our Rise of the Rune Lords game who was secretly a cleric of Zon
He
Kuthan.
was secretly evil.
Everyone in character thought that he was a cleric of Aurori, but everyone out of character knew that he was a cleric of Zon Kuthan. So like out of character, we could all be like, your character's secretly evil. But then in character, we were just like, ah, yes, and because he was, and his character put in some solid effort to keeping it from our characters in character, so we just let that secret remain.
And he was secretly evil, but incredibly loyal
Hmm.
and trustworthy to the PCs.
And so it was just fun. You have those sorts of levels of things where, like, one of the players had decided, well, I'm going to have my character make it their mission to ferret out his secret, then, like, that wouldn't be working well
Right.
with the social contract.
Like, Leo, the cleric of Zon Kutan, would die
Hmm.
for his allies. In fact, he, at one point, like, basically did a you shall not pass Gandalf thing with an entire, like, with, like, 5 encounters that added together where he's like, I have enough power that I can make these 5 encounters take a long time to get
Mhm.
past me. You guys escape
Yeah.
upstairs and beat the bosses and other things while I hold them off. He actually, instead of dying slowly, actually beat all of the
Mhm.
encounters, but like he was someone that you want on your team, even though he
Mhm.
was also a cleric of Zon Kutan and was secretly evil and was like having his evil shrine to Zon Kutan.
Yep.
So, like, people just enjoyed that in a way that they might not have if he was secretly evil and secretly subverting everyone and, like, stealing from the party and, like, murdering party
Mhm.
members or something like that.
Yes. We did have secrets more of those types in the first campaign I was ever in, but that was also like very much based on what the players were comfortable with. So I think that also goes back to like knowing your players and what they're
Yes.
comfortable with and what they actively enjoy too.
Besides, you guys didn't kill the other PCs.
No.
Your character got killed by an NPC that the
Yeah.
other PCs brought over who
That's
wanted to
true.
kill you,
That's correct.
who was an assassin.
Anyway, yeah, that campaign. And I think that one of the topics that was mentioned a while ago that we talked that might be about something like this was sort of the heist style of like where you may not know all the details up front, but details are revealed later. And
That's a
they're
great
built.
example of where the characters definitely knew it. The players didn't. Heist style flashbacks.
Yeah, So like in Blades in the Dark, where you know like how much stuff
Even
you're carrying with you.
The
Yeah.
GM and the players didn't know, but the character obviously did.
Yeah. So you get to a certain point and you run into a challenge, and then part of how that game works is that you come up with an explanation for like what your character would have done in the past to help prepare for this challenge.
And you take some stress, which is a
Hmm.
thing that can wind up really messing you up if you get too much of it. And the stress allows you to have done a flashback to when you prepared for this.
And then because that's part of the conversation, then like if there was something that would like totally make everything fall apart, then the GM can be like, well, when you went to go do this, you noticed this thing or whatever, and then
Even if it does, the GM, you're talking about Blades in the Dark,
your GM is supposed to work
the
with
or
you.
the GM can just say, okay, well, your check is
Yeah.
against like
Hmm.
this ridiculous
Yeah.
it's ridiculously risky.
Yeah.
It's not just a standard check.
And then you can be
And
like, oh yeah, well.
it's like, okay, yeah, because it's like, yeah, you said that you went in advance and
Hmm.
set up explosives that were gonna blow up a hole in the wall of the enemy's base.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's pretty risky.
Hmm.
You can try it, but
Yeah.
we'll see what happens here.
But then also you could be like, you could be like, that looks pretty risky. And it's like, oh, actually, when I went there, I noticed that there were a lot of people crawling around here. How about instead I did this sort of thing? So then you can have a dialogue about like what you saw and what you would have done and noticed and seen, and then fill in the details.
And then it can also be like, okay, well, you tried to set it up, but it misfires. It doesn't go at exactly the time that you want if they failed it, but
Hmm.
or if they got like that's the partial success in Blades
Hmm.
in the Dark. The full success is like, yep, you blew a hole in the wall and you just get out. And then the
Hmm.
failure would just be like, yeah, they caught on to that.
Hmm.
You think it's gonna blow up, but instead, five more guys come out and be like, ah, yes, this is where you thought you left those explosives yesterday, huh? We
Hmm.
knew you were going to escape trying to go through the wall here
Yes.
because obvious. So we just let you think we didn't notice you.
Yes. Exactly.
Yep, exactly. So, let's see. However, Doctor Doom from Marvel Comics has been a jerk to everyone, and so he's universally hated. It's almost comical how hated he is. That's true.
Hmm.
I mean, that's okay, but he's not like one of the PCs. Like he's general. It would be weirder if Doctor Doom was like one of the Avengers, and everyone was just like, "Okay, Doctor Doom." Even though I've been a jerk, you've been a jerk to all of us. We're just gonna keep
You're gonna just take you
adventuring with
along
you.
and be annoyed for the amusement of the viewers.
That's right.
Yep.
So, does anyone else have any questions on how to deal with these kinds of secrets where some people know and some people don't know? And if not, then we shall do our fake YouTube outro. Actually, it's a real
It is a
outro.
real outro.
All
I
right.
don't see any.
I
So
don't see any. So, take care. See you next time,
bye.
YouTube.